You know what finally made me rethink everything I thought I knew about wood strength? I split a white oak board clean in half, just dropped it wrong off the bench, and it snapped like a cracker. 6/4 thick, kiln-dried, supposedly strong as they come. And I remember standing there thinking, how is it that buildings in Japan have been standing for over 1,000 years through earthquakes and typhoons, and I can't even get a board to survive a fall off my workbench? That question sent me down a path I didn't expect. I started studying how Eastern woodworking masters, particularly in Japan but also in China and Korea, treat and prepare their wood. And what I found is that they don't rely on chemicals, epoxies, or modern stabilizers. They use the wood itself, its grain, its moisture, its fiber structure, to make it dramatically stronger and more resilient than anything most of us are getting out of our shops today. I'm going to walk you through 7 methods I've learned, each one targeting a different property of the wood itself. And stick around to the end, because I'll show you a simple soaking technique I picked up that changed how I handle every bent lamination I do now. Let's get into it. What we're really talking about today is structural intelligence, the idea that how you prepare, orient, join, and season your wood matters more than what species you're using or what finish you slap on it. Eastern woodworking traditions figured this out centuries ago, and the results speak for themselves. Once you understand the thinking behind these methods, you'll start seeing opportunities to strengthen your own work in ways that cost you nothing but attention. So let me give you some context first, because this isn't just a bag of tricks. There's a philosophy behind it. The tradition I've studied most deeply is Japanese temple carpentry, known as miyadaiku. These are the craftsmen who built structures like the Horyuji Temple in Nara, which has been standing since roughly the year 670. That's over 1,300 years. No steel reinforcement, no chemical treatment, just wood, joined and prepared with an understanding of the material that honestly puts most modern construction to shame. And it's not because they had access to some magical species of tree. They used hinoki cypress and sugi, which is cryptomeria, species that are comparable in density and strength to our western red cedar and Douglas fir. Nothing exotic. What made the difference was how they worked with those species. There's a guiding idea in Japanese woodworking that I keep coming back to. It roughly translates to reading the wood. Every board has a history. It grew in a specific orientation on the tree. It has tension and compression sides. It has a grain direction that wants to move a certain way as it ages. The Eastern approach is to understand all of that before you ever pick up a tool, and then use that knowledge to make the wood do what you need it to do. I thought that sounded like philosophy when I first heard it. Turns out it's engineering. The first method is grain orientation, and it's the foundation everything else builds on. Most of us pick a board based on appearance. We look for nice figure, minimal knots, maybe a consistent color. Eastern masters pick a board based on where it came from on the tree and how the grain runs relative to the forces that board will need to resist. Here's what I mean. When a tree grows, the wood on the outside of the trunk, the side facing away from the center, is under tension. The wood on the inside, closer to the pith, is under compression. Japanese carpenters pay very close attention to which side is which, and they orient every single board so the tension side faces the direction of expected load. For a beam, that means the outer face of the tree goes on the bottom of the span where tensile forces are greatest. For a post, the compression side faces the load-bearing direction. When I started applying this in my own shop, even on simple shelf brackets and table aprons, the difference in rigidity was noticeable. I tested this with 2 identical pieces of red oak, both about 3/4 of an inch thick and 18 inches long, one oriented with the tension side down, one with the compression side down, same species, same board, same thickness. The one oriented correctly deflected about 30% less under the same weight. 30% just by flipping the board over. That's not magic. That's reading the wood. The second method is controlled charring, and this one surprised me more than any other. Most of us know about yakisugi, the Japanese technique of charring the surface of sugi planks for exterior cladding. But what I didn't realize until I dug deeper is that charring was also used structurally, not just cosmetically. When you char the surface of a softwood like cryptomeria, or even our western red cedar, to a depth of about 1/16 of an inch using a controlled flame, you're doing several things at once. You're driving moisture out of the outer fibers. You're compressing the surface cells as they carbonize. And you're creating a hardened shell that resists both insect damage and fungal decay. But here's what really got my attention. The charred surface is actually harder than the raw wood beneath it. I tested this on a piece of eastern white pine. I charred one face with a propane torch, keeping the flame moving steadily for about 45 seconds per square foot, then let it cool completely. When I pressed my thumbnail into the charred side versus the raw side, the difference was dramatic. The charred surface barely dented. The raw side compressed easily. Now, I want to be honest, this doesn't turn pine into maple, but it meaningfully hardens the outer surface, and for applications like fence posts, garden structures, or even shop furniture that sits on a concrete floor, it's a genuine improvement in durability without a single chemical involved. By the way, if you are enjoying learning about these ancient methods, I put together something I think you will really appreciate. It is called Kenji's Workshop, and it is a collection of 100 ancient Eastern woodworking secrets for the modern craftsman. Techniques like the ones we are covering today, and a whole lot more. You can grab your copy by scanning the QR code on screen or just use the first link in the description. All right, let us keep going. The third method is compression through wedged joinery, and this is where Eastern craftsmanship really shows its genius. In most Western joinery, we cut a joint to fit snugly and then rely on glue to hold it together. The joint is static. It fits, it's glued, it's done. Eastern masters, particularly Japanese temple carpenters, design joints where the act of assembly actually compresses the wood fibers at the mating surfaces. The most common way they do this is through tapered wedges driven into split tenons. When the wedge is driven home, it forces the tenon outward against the walls of the mortise, creating mechanical compression across the grain. That compression does two things. First, it locks the joint physically so it cannot pull apart without destroying the wood. Second, it actually increases the density of the wood fibers at the contact surfaces, making those specific areas harder and more resistant to wear. I tried this on a through tenon joint in hard maple. The tenon was 7/8 of an inch wide, and I split it with a thin kerf about 2 inches deep, then drove a wedge made from the same maple, tapered from 1/8 of an inch, down to almost nothing over 2.5 inches. When that wedge seated, the joint was so tight I couldn't budge it with a mallet. No glue. And when I tried to disassemble it later out of curiosity, I had to saw the tenon off. The compression had essentially fused the surfaces together through friction and fiber interlocking. The fourth method is lamination by opposing grain direction. Now, most of us are familiar with plywood and how alternating grain direction adds strength. But Eastern craftsmen were doing this with solid wood long before plywood existed. Traditional Chinese and Japanese builders would laminate thin boards, typically between 1/4 and 3/8 of an inch thick, with alternating grain direction. Not cross-grain like plywood, but with the growth ring orientation reversed on alternating layers. So if one layer has the bark side up, the next has the bark side down. This counteracts the natural tendency of each board to cup in one direction, and the result is a panel that stays remarkably flat and resists warping forces that would easily distort a single solid board. But here's the strength benefit most people miss. When you laminate opposing grain structures together, the failure mode changes. A single board fails along its weakest grain line. A laminated panel has to fail across multiple grain orientations simultaneously, which requires dramatically more force. I've been using this approach for workbench tops and tool tote bottoms anywhere I need a panel that won't move and won't break, and the improvement in stiffness is immediately obvious. For a bench top, I'll use hard maple strips about 1 3/8 inches wide, alternating bark side up and bark side down, glued with standard yellow glue. The resulting slab behaves almost like a completely different material than a single wide maple board. The fifth method is soaking and slow bending to realign the wood fiber. Eastern boat builders, particularly in Korea and southern Japan, developed techniques for bending planks that go beyond simple steam bending. They would soak timbers in fresh water, sometimes for weeks, to fully saturate the fibers. Then they would bend the wood slowly over forms, sometimes taking several days to achieve a single curve, allowing the fibers to gradually realign rather than fracturing under sudden stress. The key insight here is speed. When you steam bend a piece of white oak over 20 minutes, you're forcing the fibers to stretch on the outside of the curve and compress on the inside. Some fibers break. You get internal fractures that weaken the piece even though it holds its shape. When you soak and bend slowly over days, the fibers have time to actually slide past each other and settle into new positions. The result is a bent piece that retains far more of its original tensile strength. I've started applying this to chair parts. I'll soak a piece of white oak, about 7/8 of an inch square, in a trough of water for 5 to 7 days. Then bend it over a form and clamp it incrementally over 48 hours. The failure rate dropped from about 1 in 4 pieces cracking during bending down to almost 0. The sixth method is strategic seasoning and moisture manipulation. This one is so simple it almost seems too obvious, but it's one of the biggest differences between Eastern and Western practice. Most of us buy kiln-dried lumber and start building. Eastern masters season their wood for years, sometimes decades, and they pay attention to how and where it dries. Japanese temple carpenters traditionally air-dry their hinoki cypress for a minimum of 1 year per inch of thickness, and many prefer 3 to 5 years per inch. They stack the wood in open-sided sheds where airflow is consistent, but direct sun never hits the boards. The result is wood with a more uniform moisture content throughout the cross-section than kiln drying typically achieves, and uniform moisture means uniform strength. When a kiln-dried board has a moisture gradient, the outer shell is drier and harder while the core is slightly wetter and softer. Under load, that gradient becomes a stress riser. The board is more likely to fail at the boundary between dry and wet zones. Air-dried wood that has equalized slowly doesn't have that internal stress. I know most of us can't wait 5 years to start a project, but even adding 3 to 6 months of air drying in your shop after buying kiln-dried lumber, letting it acclimate fully, makes a measurable difference in how that wood performs. The seventh method is reinforcement through embedded wooden keys and Dutchmen. When Eastern craftsmen encounter a crack, a weak spot, or a natural defect in a structural timber, they don't fill it with epoxy and move on. They cut a precisely fitted wooden key, often butterfly or bow tie shaped, and set it across the defect. This is structural, not decorative. A properly fitted butterfly key in white oak set across a developing crack in a tabletop or beam does something epoxy cannot. It applies mechanical compression perpendicular to the crack direction, physically preventing the crack from opening further, and because the key is wood, it moves with the surrounding material through seasonal changes. Epoxy is rigid, it doesn't move. So over years of wood movement, an epoxy repair develops micro gaps at its edges, and the crack continues to grow past the repair. A wooden key stays tight because it expands and contracts in sympathy with the piece it's embedded in. Let me share some patterns I've noticed over the years, things I used to do myself, that these traditions handle completely differently. The first pattern is relying on finish for protection. Most of us put all our faith in polyurethane or lacquer to protect our work. Eastern masters put their faith in preparation. A well-oriented, properly seasoned, and carefully joined piece of wood needs far less finish to perform well over time. The second pattern is treating all boards as interchangeable. I used to grab whichever board was the right dimension and start cutting. But once I started reading the grain, checking the ring orientation, and thinking about where each piece came from on the tree, my joinery got tighter and my projects lasted longer. The third pattern is rushing the drying process. We want to build now, so we grab kiln-dried stock and go. But that internal moisture gradient is working against us from the start, and taking even a few months to let the wood equalize in our shop makes a real difference. The fourth pattern is filling defects instead of reinforcing them. Epoxy is convenient, but it creates a rigid spot in a material that's always moving. Wooden keys and Dutchmen work with the wood instead of against it, and they're stronger for it over time. The good news is, once you see these patterns for what they are, you can start shifting your approach one project at a time. Now for that bonus tip I promised at the beginning. This is something I picked up from studying Korean boat builders, and I've never seen it in any Western woodworking reference. Before bending a piece of wood, they would soak it in fresh water, as I described, but they would also massage the outside of the curve with a smooth hardwood dowel, about 1.5 inches in diameter, rolling it firmly along the grain for several minutes. What this does is pre-compress the outer fibers before the bend, essentially giving them somewhere to go when the wood is curved. Think of it like stretching before exercise. When I started doing this with white oak chair spindles before bending, the surface quality on the outside of the curve improved dramatically. No more tiny fracture lines that you can feel with your fingertip. The wood bends cleaner, holds its shape better, and the finished surface looks like it was never bent at all. All it takes is a smooth piece of hard maple dowel and about 5 minutes of firm, steady rolling pressure along the grain before you start your bend. One more thing before I let you go. I spent a long time gathering the best ancient Eastern woodworking methods I have come across, and I put them all into a book called Kenji's Workshop. 100 techniques that most modern woodworkers have never seen, with step-by-step photos and clear explanations you can actually follow in your shop. Scan the QR code on screen right now, or grab it from the first link in the description. I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in the next one.